Hi there. um, I'm almost losing my voice. I hope that you can hear me. I did want to just make a quick video, it won't be long, to help give you some visual aids to process this very complicated eidetic process that Hegel is presenting us with. Um, so we've got these three stages. And as you see in the lesson documents, I'm going to flip over to that myself right now. The three phases, Williams has some pretty fancy names for them. Let's start with phase number 1. This is the phase of abstract parochial universality. I'm not sure if anybody took a moment to look up the word parochial here. This is not referring to like a Catholic parish, but rather to a limited kind of understanding is the idea behind parochial. And so our first person to arrive on the scene has this sense that they are all that exists, right? That there's nobody else in the universe except them. Like I said in the bit about Cartesian solipsism, this is definitely what Williams calls logically primitive, right? This is just really giving us a ground, a baseline to measure the craziness that comes later. So person number 1 has this limited understanding of the kind of universality that he has, which is he thinks that he is all that exists, or she. And that's who this person is. That's as much self-knowledge as they have. So very similar to Descartes' cogito, where all I really know about myself is that I'm thinking. I can't say for sure if the contents of my thoughts are correct. I can't say for sure if the relationships that I have actually exist with other people. All I know is that I'm a thinking thing. So very limited in scope. The sense of universality here upon which my whole identity is based is very limited because I know so little about the universe, all right? So as a good grounding, I like to think of this person as being the first kid in a family who thinks that they're going to always be the only kid in the family. And then, oh dear, what happens? Person number 2 comes along. And this causes a lot of questioning in person number 1 about who they actually are, since who they actually thought themselves to be before person 2 came along was the coolest only person in the whole universe, right? So you'll notice in my terminology and the lesson 4 documents that I refer to this stage as being not really a self yet, but a pre-self, because the understanding of who he is so limited and so abstract, really. So not really a self yet, but his entire identity is based upon this idea that I am the only child. I am the only thing that exists of my kind, until it encounters some other pre-self. And there's this moment here where he totally freaks out. So before we can get into talking about the opposition, we need to understand what is happening with the total freaking out. Here is where I need you to know these other terms. Sorry about my voice. Self-othering, other being, and the other. Okay? So what happens when peg person number 1 sees peg person number 2 is that suddenly it's like looking in a mirror, right? This peg person number 1 sees peg person number 2 and only realizes that that person is like them because they're seeing themselves through the other person's eyes. So self-othering is seeing myself as others see me. And it's frightening, right? Suddenly realizing that I'm just a particular person among other particular people. Similarly, the way I see this other person is not really as an other being, is not really as an other, but as the terminology given here as an other being, which means that I see them as a mirror image of myself. So I'm not seeing them as a unique individual. I'm seeing them more as a copy of me. And that's not entirely fair either, because person number 2, of course, is an actual other. But if I'm only seeing what I've projected onto them of my own self, I'm not really seeing them for who they are. So hoping those terms are somewhat clear. Self-othering, again, self-othering refers to the way peg person number 1 now has to see him or herself after this initial encounter, which is that, oh my gosh, I am an other to somebody else, right? Other being is the way I see the second person, which is to say I don't really see them at all. I see a mere image of myself, projecting myself onto them. That's other being. It's like my other being, right? And then Williams says to use this other terminology as just the other for should I get to that place where I can actually see peg person number 2 as a unique individual and not just my copy. All right, so that's stage 1 coming to an end with this confrontation. And what happens next is really quite interesting. And this is where we move away from it being logically primitive to being something that we've actually experienced. So Hegel claims that if you go back to what I was saying about desire in the last lesson, desire is recognizing that you lack something, right? Peg person number 1, and really this is happening for both of them, peg person number 1 now realizes that they lack something. Any idea what it is? It's that sense of universality, right? If peg person number 1 thought that they were universal, that they were the only person in existence, and are confronted with proof that that is not true, there's a hole in their understanding of who they are. Their sense of universality has been damaged in some way, and they want it back. They want their intact sense of who they are back. So this leads to a struggle. This is what Williams calls the phase of opposition between particulars, and otherwise the process of mediation. And again, I referred to this in the handout in last lesson about Descartes. The process of mediation. Mediation just here means struggle or conflict. So a lot of time is usually spent for people in the second stage where they're trying to figure out who they are vis-a-vis with respect to other people. And there's a struggle here, and the struggle is they both want their sense of universality back from the other person, and they're willing to fight for it. And so here's where, and we'll talk more about this, there's more to be said here. The next lesson is almost entirely about death, so get ready. The struggle often ends in one of 2 different kinds of death. One of them is annihilation, which is this kind of death, like actual biological death, which you would see like in the natural world, right? This is what happens in nature. And secondly, assimilation. Now, assimilation is much more interesting. Assimilation is one of them will finally come out on top. Peg person number 1 is saying to the peg person number 2, I am the universal king. No, I am the universal king. I am the universal king. And one of them will threaten the other one in a way where the other one's like, fine, you're the universal king, right? So here now we have the master, and here now we have the slave. We've got somebody who's dominant. We've got somebody who is definitely not dominant. And so the master, it would seem, is now in this really lucky place where I got my universality back. But did he really? Because person number 2 is still there. And person number 2 can say, oh yes, you're the master. You are the best. You are the universal being as many times as he wants, or as many times as he's made to say it, but it's always forced. So it doesn't mean anything, right? And so the master's recognition is sort of hollow. Obviously, the slave's position is not great either. And this relationship is extremely volatile. The slave can end up with more of a sense of self, strangely, than the master. I think we'll be talking more about this in the next lesson. So anyway, that's the second stage where somebody comes out as being dominant and another person comes out as being subservient. So the big mystery then is, how do we get to this third stage? Presumably we all spend a lot of time in the second stage, mastering some people, being subservient to other people, and figuring out who we are in relationship to other people in this process. But if we are lucky, we'll get to this third stage. And I guess I've got a note here that the pre-selves emerge as actual selves in this third step. Williams calls this the phase of emergent concrete or mediated universality. And what changes is that there's suddenly some self-recognition that goes on. Person number one sees person number two, and usually it's not the same relationship, but another relationship where they've both come from different master-slave sorts of scenarios and see each other, and something about this moment for these two people doesn't lead to the struggle. Something about the moment of encounter with these two people skips the struggle, and instead this time there's this recognition that you are somebody that I can learn to see as a unique individual. And so the pre-selves emerge as actual selves. In this case, reading my children's toy box, it looks like the actual selves that have emerged are Little Miss Muffet and a minion. So our pre-selves have turned into full-fledged individuals where self-othering is no longer happening, but I'm actually seeing somebody who's unique but also the same as me in some way, right? Like there is some similarities between people. And Miss Muffet is seeing the minion in the same way that you are somebody who is unique, an individual in your own right, and somebody I can learn to understand. We're similar enough to understand each other, but different enough to still be two different people. And the experience that lets them do that is Geist, right? Which we talked about last time. So I think that's most of what I wanted to make sure was clear to you. The next lesson we'll be looking at more detail of the master-slave dynamic, and the two different kinds of death, annihilation and assimilation. Assimilation really means the master and slave relationship. And then all of the next 3 lessons on Hegel are about that third stage and understanding what it means to be in a kind of friendship where you're not just seeing who you think that person is, but you're actually seeing somebody who's unique and different from you. And you're not projecting an image onto them. So my hope is that this resonates for you in a really basic way, and that you can understand or you can recognize how this process has played out in your own life in one way or another. And if not in your own life, then hopefully you'll be able to understand why I assigned the Ibsen play at the same time. And now I'm going to shut up because I know my voice is terrible to listen to right now. Again, I want to encourage you, though, if you do have any questions or you're feeling overwhelmed or confused about anything, drop me an email, come into my office. This is an online class, I know, but I really do value having you come and talk to me or reach out to me if there's anything I can do. So take care and don't get sick.